Hey guys, this is Max and Danny Steinberg. We're partners at SaberSim. But we want to create a quick video talking about DraftKings Showdown and FanDuel single game slates that are these new really popular forms of daily fantasy that are actually blowing up. If you look at DraftKings this week, there's a $2.5 million guaranteed prize pool Showdown tournament, which is really big. So Danny, would you mind explaining what Showdown is?
Yeah, so Showdown, normally in daily fantasy, we have a slate that consists of maybe several games to even as high as 15 or 16 games. In Showdown, you're only doing one game, and you're only picking 6 or 5 players from that game. And one of those players you designate as a captain, which is that player will receive a 1.5x multiplier on whatever fantasy points he receives.
Right, and DraftKings and FanDuel actually have a small distinction here. With DraftKings, they're actually prices multiplied by 1.5 when you pick them for the captain, whereas FanDuel, I think their prices stay static, which already adds a different kind of nuance.
Right, so on DraftKings, on FanDuel, you're mostly going to want to pick the absolute best player for the captain position, where on DraftKings, you may want to think about economization of salary a little bit and maybe some high upside value play.
Absolutely. So one thing that's unique to this week, but it's probably going to be true most weeks, is just the top heaviness of this tournament. So if you look at the contest details here, you see something immediately stands out. It stands out to me and Danny for sure, is that first place is $1 million, where second place is only $100,000. That $1 million is 40% of the entire prize pool. So this is a really, really top-heavy tournament. And that's going to create a certain kind of strategy that we want to do to actually get edge in this tournament. Because these types of tournaments, Showdown is definitely a lower edge form of daily fantasy. Obviously, when you only have one game to choose from, there's only so many different players you can use. But what you can do in Showdown to make profitable lineups, make good lineups, is have a lineup construction that's going to give you a unique lineup that's going to be able to maximize your chance of being the one person who's going to win that $1 million. Because if you've played Showdowns in the past, what you'll actually find is you'll actually find 20, 50 way ties.
100
people with the same lineup. And that really just destroys your edge, because instead of playing for $1 million, you're playing for a $50,000 top prize. And that's, if you're playing for that kind of top prize, you're going to have a really hard time actually finding an edge doing that. Yeah.
Having a non-unique lineup just cuts down your EV a ton, because only when you have a unique lineup, you're able to actually win the $1 million prize.
Right. So let's talk about what SaberSim already does, because we're talking about uniqueness. We're always talking about upside in tournaments. We want both of this. So SaberSim's lineup builder does some really cool things regarding this. One has to do with correlation. So a lot of sites try to take into account correlation by forcing stacks. They allow you to do stacking rules, or maybe using historical correlations. I think some do that. But I think SaberSim's really well equipped to make great lineups, because we actually take correlations we get from simulating every game 10,000 times. They're really quite cool because they give you a really accurate representation of correlation, and it's not, sometimes it's different than you think. And I think something we noticed when we were looking at this, which I think is really cool, and I think you thought was cool as well, has to do with how our correlations can be different.
Right. So, some sites you'll have rules like force a QB wide receiver tight end stack. And that works well on some teams, but on other teams like Chicago, where they have a running back that catches a lot of passes, you get to miss out on these stacks with pass-catching running backs that are actually really optimal. We actually have Tariq Cohen here as the second most correlated player to Mitchell Trubisky. And using a traditional solver that just uses rules will never give you a Tariq Cohen and Mitchell Trubisky stack. And because we're using math rather than these rules, are able to see the optimalness of Tariq Cohen or a stack with some running backs and some quarterbacks, like in this situation.
Absolutely. So SaberSim handles correlation because of the simulations very well. We also, our builder incorporates ownership fade. So even if and we allow you to adjust these ownerships as well, so that really helps. So we're incorporating fading ownership, we're incorporating correlations. We have a way of diversifying, which I've talked about in previous videos, and you can look at those to hear more about what smart diversity is. But it's basically a way of diversifying your lineups in a way that takes into account upside really well. So we're doing all of this, and SaberSim is going to account for these things really well. But now we need to talk about what we can do to specifically make the settings better, or make the projections or ownerships better. That's going to really make us the best Showdown lineups.
Right, totally. And I would say lowering the max salary is a good way to do that, or is a good way to ensure a uniqueness of your lineup. So if you look at the data on most tournaments for non-Showdown, almost 90% or more of the lineups leave a few $100s of salary on the table or use the entire salary cap. So in order to get a unique lineup, we need to restrain the lineup builder to only allow us lineups that aren't that close to using up the entire cap to help ensure or help the likelihood that we'll have a unique lineup in the field.
Right, exactly. We're not going to totally ensure that we're not going to have a duplicate lineup, but this is going to help quite a bit. And I think lowering that min salary and allowing the builder to sometimes make lineups that leave a lot of salary on the table might be helpful as well.
Right.
So we're going to do that. And then another thing that we also want to do and talk about is just the idea of taking an angle. So I think with Showdown slates, you know, the projections that you're going to find at SaberSim, you're going to find other places, they're not going to have huge differences.
Sure.
And so when it comes to if we're just creating the best lineup in accord with projection, what you're going to end up doing is, if you don't really take an angle, even with all these things we've taken into consideration, you still might not get a unique lineup. So one thing that you want to do, or we suggest doing, is trying to take a stand on a player. And what we mean by that is we're not saying that this player is going to be you're accurately projecting them, or that you think they're a lock, because obviously no players are locks in fantasy football. If you've played for a few years, you're certainly aware of this. You just want to think about, okay, what player do I think might be a little underprojected, might be a little under the radar? Who do I think is going to be, a player that's going to be popular? And try to take a stand that way. So, by taking a stand, I mean adjusting their projection in a way that's going to make us get them more than we quote unquote should. So, is there a player for that with that for you?
Yeah, Anthony Miller's a guy who, friend of us, Nick Yuskevich, really is high on. He was injured all of last year. I think he may be a little better this year than people think. Maybe he is a more targeted player, or is closer to Allen Robinson than you may think.
Yeah, he was actually a high draft pick 2 years ago. And if you look at some of the statistics that are great for wide receivers that have to do with air yards, something you'd find at the free website airyards.com, or different advanced statistics you look at, he actually shows up really, really well, like exceptionally well.
Really?
In a few games, and he didn't have a large sample because he's injured last year, but at the start of the season, he had some great air yard numbers, some great target share numbers.
End zone targets, I think, are pretty ideal.
Yeah, and also end zone targets was something I calculate on my own. And so I actually agree with you. I think Anthony Miller is a really kind of under the radar play. I doubt he's going to be that popular.
Right.
And so what we're going to do is we're just going to raise his projection quite a bit here. We're going to just really take a stand here and say we're going to raise him with the flex, we're going to raise him with the captain, we're going to say, okay, you know what? We think this guy's going to perform much better than expected, right?
Yeah.
And so then we can also do something with ownership as well if we see fit. I think these ownership numbers look pretty good as they are. And, this is going to change when the slate comes, because I know for a fact Trey Burton is possibly not going to play.
Yes.
And that could raise Adam Shaheen's ownership a lot. So you're going to have to really, I wouldn't follow as much when you watch this video say, oh, I'm just going to do what Danny and Max are doing. What you want to do is just look at the concepts that we're using and try to translate into Showdown.
So, as far as ownership adjustments go, like guys you've been hearing a lot of hype on, often those may be underprojected by ownership.
Yeah.
I know Aaron Jones maybe is one of those, or David Montgomery. Both of those guys are really hot names right now, and maybe we could underproject their ownership.
Yeah, so maybe we'll boost their ownership quite a bit.
Another thing I really like about SaberSim that other sites don't have is the team-based adjustments. is, let's say you just have an angle about the game itself. Like maybe you think, like me, that Green Bay's a little better than they're getting credit for, and Chicago maybe a little worse. You can actually adjust the team totals up and down, and those adjustments will be taken into consideration on each individual player's projection. So Max just increased Green Bay's point total about a point, right?
Yep.
So as you'll see when we put those adjustments in, every player on Green Bay will have a little bit higher of a projection, and even some players on Chicago's will change a bit because the more points Green Bay scores, the better their quarterback is going to do.
Right, exactly. And well, it's because all players are correlated, right? So obviously, Green Bay scores a few more points. That's going to actually raise some of the offensive production of other players.
Exactly.
So that I love that feature as well. I'm really glad you mentioned that. So we have all our adjustments here, and so we also have our build settings as well. And so I'm just going to actually start building a lineup pool. So we're going to build 50 lineups for this Showdown slate. And this is probably going to take about a minute. But what we're going to end up having is a set of lineups that are going to be off to the right over here, our 50 lineups. And SaberSim is going to give us a snapshot of what players that we're getting, what they're projected to be owned with the field, how much we're owning them in our lineups. And it's going to allow us to check this a little bit and make some adjustments. So one thing that's really interesting that I'm seeing so far is, and what we alluded to with DraftKings is, that captain spot is really interesting because with FanDuel, there's no way this would happen and our builder would not have this happen. But on DraftKings, Adam Shaheen actually is a great captain pick. And that's because his price is so low and he actually does have potential. And it'll be interesting when the slate actually happens because if Trey Burton's out, Adam Shaheen's projection is going to raise quite a bit, and his ownership projection might raise quite a bit, and it'll be interesting what the SaberSim builder does in that situation. But for now, this is just a great way of illustrating how, sometimes actually it seems like the best thing to do is use a cheap guy in that cabinet spot. And if you look at the construction of these lineups, it sort of makes sense because what it ends up happening is it allows us to get some of these really high-priced guys who are going to be the best players without having to sacrifice anywhere else. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So this is sort of our spread of lineups. We have 50 lineups. Here's some of the exposures for both the captain and flex. And I like to think of this stage as sort of a quality control thing. It's just looking at the lineups and saying, does this really make sense? Do I really like what this is doing? And one thing that's standing out to me just immediately is Mike Davis. I do like him as a play. I also think he's overprojected. I think that David Montgomery is going to get a little more run than this. So I think it's possible that we've overprojected him a little bit. So I'm just going to lower his projection there. And this is actually just going to instantly lower his exposure percentage. What it's going to do is swap out some of the lineups that we had immediately and put them back into the pool and then swap in lineups without Mike Davis.
Right. This is another great thing about SaberSim is after we do the first run, you don't actually have to do another run again when you're adjusting ownerships and whatnot because we create more lineups than you need and we're able to interchange those lineups based on the different exposures you want for a player.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really... And also, you can adjust it a different way. You could say, I don't want 80% Aaron Rodgers, I just want 70%, and you just do it that way as well. It's just cap his exposure at 70%, and then you get Aaron Rodgers that way. I usually trust what Saber does for the most part, and what I like to do is actually just adjust projections that I see wrong once this happened, or I see that I don't agree with, instead of using that exposure percentage, because the Saber builder is really, really well equipped to actually handle this once you adjust
it. May be sharper at constructing lineups than really we could be. So yeah, I agree with that. Focus on the projections and the ownership projections and the team projections and let Saber do the lineup construction.
Right. And then I think as a last check, we just should think about, are these lineups actually going to be unique? So I think one thing is Anthony Miller's projected at 20% ownership. So we do have a low-owned guy that we're probably going to get quite a bit. So I think that's good. We have Adam Shaheen in the captain, and basically all low salary players in the captain. I think that probably will be unique, but might not be as unique as the slate actually approaches if Trey Burton's out.
Yes.
And so we might want to do something different if that's the case. But it is interesting is you just have to think about, okay, because right now we have Adam Sheen as 7% owned in the captain
Right.
spot. So if this is really optimal, like Saber is suggesting, and I actually believe that, obviously I trust the math that's going on behind the scenes, but I sort of get why it's doing this is, Shaheen's a tight end. He could score a touchdown or two. So he actually does have that upside. And this just allows us so much more flexibility with all these flex spots and allows us to just fit all these guys that have upside more so than, if we put Devontae Adams in here, suddenly we have an $18,000 price
it
tag.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it actually makes a ton of sense. I really like how Saber is actually constructing these lineups, and I actually wouldn't have thought about this before we actually made these lineups today.
No, I wouldn't either.
This wasn't something I was thinking about.
And it's nice that Saber's doing the math because we could both think, hey, maybe Adam Shaheen is optimal the captain spot, but we would never know. But because Saber's actually calculating it, you can have some confidence that, hey, this actually makes sense, even though it does seem a little wild, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I think looking over these lineups, we might, given that we're leaving the salary on the table, given this lineup, it's 47,300. This probably is going to be unique. Maybe it won't. I mean, it's tough to say. There's so many lineups. Yeah, I hope so too. But you can look over the lineups and say, okay, do these look like unique lineups? And I think a lot of them look like they could be. And again, we're just trying to ensure we have the most possible. If some aren't, but they're good lineups, they're probably going to still be profitable. But you want to look at the spread and just be honest with yourself and say, are these going to be different enough that I'm actually going to have an edge at these big GPPs?
Right.
And one thing that's also cool about Saber as an aside that I'll just get really quickly is usually when you make lineups in another lineup builder, they're going to maximize for just projection, basically. You're going to have rules, and they're just going to give you the highest projection lineups. Saber actually maximizes by something called SaberScore, so SaberScore, which is taking into account all those things that we started out when we were using the builder, it's the score, it's the projection score, including the correlations, including how much ownership fade you're having, and how much upside you have. So it's taking all these account really, really well, and actually building lineups that are going to actually not just give you the highest average projection, which we don't care about, as we've talked about earlier in this video, and actually giving you the highest projection that matters, which is SaberScore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that well.
Thank you, Danny. So that's basically it. I mean, obviously, we're not going to upload these lineups right away. I want to wait till closer to the contest beginning. I want to make sure that we have all the injuries right. Maybe look on Twitter, see who's getting buzz.
Right.
Really
look at who is ruled inactive. That's really important for football.
Exactly.
It's an hour and a half before kickoff.
Right. You can get good information close to kickoff. So you really want to make sure that your lineup's either edited or uploaded right, and updated right before the game starts. So you're taking into account all those things. So thanks for joining us. I hope you try out Showdown on DraftKings or FanDuel or the single game on FanDuel. These prize pools are really big, so it's a chance to win $1 million. That's hard to say that you have many chances at that. So hope you really enjoyed this. If you have any questions, you can tweet us. I'm at Max J. Steinberg on Twitter. Danny is at Daniel Singer S. You can also sign up for a free trial. We're offering free 3-day trial for anyone to try SaberSim, which is a much better offer than I think you can find anywhere else. You really have nothing to lose. Just try these projection and tools and builders that we have that are really, I think, the best in the business.
Absolutely. I mean, if you use a lineup builder, if you play DFS, give us a try. I guarantee that you will like us better than our competitors.
Yeah. So if you have any questions, please tweet us. You can join our Slack channel. There's a lot of ways to find us. So hope you enjoyed this again, and really good luck with your lineups on Thursday, and good luck with the NFL season.